Support for this episode of Youth Culture Matters comes from videoblocks.com. Get studio quality video footage, audio, and images for a fraction of the cost with VideoBlocks. Visit them online at videoblocks.com/CPYU.
Unless you've been asleep, you know that the last few weeks have been flooded with news stories about a growing number of political and celebrity figures and allegations regarding sexual abuse and assault. What's now known as the Weinstein Effect was front and center again this week with the firing of NBC Today Show host Matt Lauer. Should we be shocked? Should we be surprised? We believe that this cultural moment provides us with the opportunity to look inward, to talk to ourselves, and to talk to our kids about a host of issues from a biblical perspective. What are those issues, and how should we talk about them? We'll be talking about how to seize these teachable moments and more on this episode of Youth Culture Matters.
From the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, this is Youth Culture Matters. If you're a parent, youth worker, educator, counselor, grandparent, or anyone else who cares about kids, we're glad you've joined us for this practical, informative, and hope-filled podcast. This is a place where together we talk and think Christianly about the rapidly changing world of today's children, teens, and young adults.
Well, everybody, welcome to another episode of Youth Culture Matters. I'm Walt Mueller here in the beautiful CPYU studios, sitting across from Kenton Hawk and Chris Wagner, our trustworthy producers, and connected with Jason Soshenik out on the West Coast. Jason, this is the week after Thanksgiving. It's also the week after, I think, our two football teams met.
It is.
You got anything to say about that, or?
No, not this time, because your Eagles are looking quite the team, and my Bears are, well, I don't have as much to cheer about the Bears as I do about the Cubs.
Okay. Well, I got to ask you this question, because with the way the Eagles have been playing, I've become a bit of a Philly sports TV, radio junkie more than normal, because there's a lot to talk about. And most people don't know this. If you're not a football fan, I'll just pass this on. The Eagles picked up your best receiver from last year, Alshon Jeffrey, who's been doing a good job for us, and they've started to talk about a guarantee that he made last year when he was with the Bears. Do you know what that was?
I actually do not know.
Okay, so you've heard none of this news. He guaranteed at the end of last season that they would be in the Super Bowl this year. And now he's not with the Bears, so he's saying, I never said what team. So he's now saying that it applies to the team that he's on. I was just curious if that story has leaked beyond Philly. I guess not.
Well,
I think that you've heard.
I've heard he made some sort of guarantee. I haven't read into what that guarantee was. I'll be honest. There's a fluctuation in how I go about cheering for my teams. When the Cubs take off, I don't pay as much attention as I should to the Bears. And when the Bears take off and the Cubs are bad, I only have so much energy to invest in a team.
Yeah.
And now that I have kids and a family, you know this as well as I do, that when a team does well, it can actually take a lot of energy away from family time. So I'm very cautious with how I choose my teams and how I cheer.
So as a Chicago sports fan, you've had like some great family time over the years. Is that what you're saying? And not only that, then when you've needed to reach for sport, you really dig down to the bottom of the barrel. And where does he go, Chris?
Soccer.
Yeah, soccer. That's what I'm thinking. So
bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
Man, you guys do not love
all right, well, let's change the subject here. I want to talk about Thanksgiving real quickly.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because we're still celebrating Thanksgiving at our house a week after, because our crew did not eat as well as they normally eat. So one of the great benefits of that has been the last two nights after dinner, and it's just Lisa and I there now, okay? She'll say to me, I'll be sitting there, and she'll say, we'll have left the table, sitting on the couch. She'll say, would you like a sampler? Which is the pie sampler. And then it's always followed up by, don't get used to this, which is really funny. But is pie a big thing for you guys at Thanksgiving, or? I'm wondering. It is for us. I mean, no? Yes, Kenton?
It depends on where the Thanksgiving's being
Chris?
hosted.
All right. So we won't set to
certain families are pie's a big thing, and other family sections pie's not.
I thought maybe you were talking about the quality of the baking,
no,
the
I'm
flavor.
saying, yeah,
yeah.
No, you know.
Like you don't want to eat the pie at the house where there's 3 cats.
No, I'm talking about it literally, one half of the family pie is a big deal.
Yeah.
The other half of the family, extended family, that is,
all right.
Pie is not a big deal.
Favorite pie, Chris, real quick.
Pecan.
Favorite things. Pecan pie?
Yeah.
Pecan instead of pecan. Pecan.
I don't have you can say it either way. I'm not going to say there's a right or wrong there. How about that?
That is a lie. You will say there's a right or a wrong. I know you too well.
No, actually, that one, because I don't know. I've heard it both ways, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong.
All right. Kenton, favorite pie?
Probably apple pie.
Apple pie, okay. Lisa's apple pie this year was, in the words of everybody in our family, banging. It was really good. She did a good apple pie. Jason, favorite pie?
It was banging.
Yeah.
I do not like pie. Sorry. I mean, I'll take pumpkin here and there, and I'll do apple if it's handed to me, but I'm not a pie person.
Okay, favorite Thanksgiving dessert.
What was it? Well, what about you? Well, what cranberry sauce by far?
I like the sampler. So the last couple of nights have been really good because the sampler plates come with a little slice of apple, a little slice of pumpkin, and a little slice of blueberry. It's been awesome. I've had a couple of great nights. Yeah, I have never had a blueberry pie. She's great. She's a great baker.
That sounds good.
Yeah, wow. So she comes from a long line of good bakers. So
okay, so I will say this: being in the Pacific Northwest, we get great huckleberries and huckleberry pie. That is a great pie. So we will leave it there.
Huckleberry. Okay. Well, we don't have huckleberries around here. We would say here that's kind of odd, right? Huckleberries. I mean, do you know?
I can't say that I've had a huckleberry pie.
See, when I think of huckleberry, I think of that cartoon, Huckleberry Hound. Which you guys have no clue what that is, do you? Do you know who Huckleberry Hound is, Kenton? Have you ever heard of Huckleberry Hound?
I have heard of it, but I can't picture.
He was in the Beatles. So we still are working on Kenton's pop culture trivia. So all right, well, good. Well, before we jump into the topic today, there's a couple things I want to talk about. One thing I do want to mention is we have a new sponsor for the podcast, which is awesome. Video Blocks, which is offering a triple bundle of video, audio, and images for the price of $149, and that's for our CPYU Youth Culture Matters podcast listeners, has put together that nice package for us. So we want to just basically give a shout-out to them and say thank you to them. You can learn more about Video Blocks in this special offer and what they have to offer to folks in youth ministry and churches who use images, audio clips, video clips. You can learn more by clicking on the link at the bottom of the page for the podcast, and then also at videoblocks.com/CPYU, videoblocks.com/CPYU. So thank you to our friends at Video Blocks for sponsoring this episode of Youth Culture Matters. So, Jason, we've got an interesting podcast today because we are going to jump into a discussion, you and I, about the elephant in the room this week in our culture. Well, actually, the elephant's been in the room for a few weeks. Actually, the elephant's been in the room for a long, long time. Maybe we haven't known the elephant's there. Now the elephant's in the room, and it seems like every day it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so we have to address it, and we're going to talk about it here. But let me start with this. I'm actually on Wikipedia. I'm breaking all my rules here. But that's
You're on Wikipedia. Wow,
I am.
okay.
I'm looking at my laptop here, looking at Wikipedia, and you know what I called up? I called up the Weinstein Effect, which, by the way, that may wind up, you know how we can track culture with the Oxford English Dictionary, and they're always removing words and adding words based on things that are happening in culture. Let's just presume that maybe this next coming revision, this will be in the dictionary, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it. I think it's unfortunate in that it reflects the craziness in our culture. I think it's a fortunate thing in that it reflects that we're starting to wake up to the elephant in the room in our culture and deal with this issue of sexual assault and the abuse that's out there. So have you heard this term, Weinstein Effect?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have, but I didn't know it was on Wikipedia yet. So
Well, see, you're not.
How does
you're
it?
not
How
like
does
me.
it define on Wikipedia?
Yeah, you need to spend more time on Wikipedia. So here's what it says. First couple sentences.
Are you
it
saying
says,
that as a professor?
Yeah, because this is the most reliable place. But this is a good definition. Short, okay?
Yeah.
The Weinstein Effect is a phenomenon where allegations of sexual harassment and assault against celebrities are publicized and trigger responses from companies and institutions. It is named after American producer Harvey Weinstein, whose sexual abuse allegations precipitated an immediate national reckoning against sexual abuse in 2017. And of course, it goes on to list other people since then, and that list obviously has been growing. This week we had allegations against Matt Lauer, Garrison Keillor, right?
Yeah.
And have they both issued apologies? I think they have, or statements.
I don't know
of
about
some
Garrison.
sort. Yeah.
Matt has, yes.
Yeah. So Matt Lauer has.
Well, the list is. So I was taking a look at this list, and I'm just going to throw out. These aren't all the names, but these are many of them. So
all with allegations.
Keller,
yeah.
All with allegations. Yeah, these are allegations. Russell Simmons just stepped down.
Yeah.
I believe it's from Def Jam. Louis C.K., Al Franken, Matthew Weiner, who produced Mad Men. We had Roy Moore.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Tambor. We had Ed Westwick, who was on Gossip Girls. Brett Ratner, Jeremy Piven. Dustin Hoffman, that was one that came out several weeks ago. Here's one that we haven't even mentioned yet, but this was really big, and actually it was one of those that really started the tidal wave, but Kevin Spacey.
Yeah.
George H.W. Bush has been on this list. Steven Seagal, Ben Affleck, Bill Cosby, if we're going back even further, this was before the effect, but and then even like Bill O'Reilly. But these are names.
You mentioned Charlie Rose?
I didn't mention Charlie Rose, no. Yeah. I mean, these are people that are very influential. And some of them, like Charlie Rose and Matt Lauer, you might even add the words character or integrity to them. It's really shocking when you hear these allegations come forward. And the people that are giving the allegations, there have been individuals like, I think Gwyneth Paltrow has come forward, Olivia Munn, Terry Crew has come forward, sharing their sexual assaults and stories of abuse. It's actually really crazy to think about the number of individuals coming forward, sharing their story, or those that have been accused.
Yeah. Well, in thinking about this, for me anyway, part of the initial reaction is if someone, I'm going to confess my human nature here now, okay? My initial reaction typically is when I hear these things, saddened but not surprised. There's definitely with the Matt Lauer thing, I mean, that was like, whoa. And then, you're going, okay, it can be anybody. And by the way, the curtain is just being pulled back now on this. I mean, can you imagine next week and the week after, and as the days and the months, the weeks unfold, how many new names will be on here? Because you keep hearing, well, there's going to be another announcement soon, and maybe it's this person, maybe it's that. But my initial reaction is that because we're so divided in this country, and because ideologically, religiously, politically, we tend to polarize ourselves from others, what I've seen happening is if someone from the other camp, whatever the other camp is, gets knocked over by this, we tend to rejoice. We tend to gloat. We tend to go, oh, I'm not surprised, that kind of thing. And I've got to be honest with you that for I'm 61 now, and I've had to deal with that. Because especially as a Christian, if someone who is opposed to my faith falls, we tend to gloat and rejoice rather than mourn and grieve. Yeah. And so I think we have to watch that reaction. But the other reaction that I've learned to jump to and embrace as I've learned to preach the gospel to myself is this whole notion that I shouldn't be pointing a finger at somebody else. I should be looking in the mirror right now because there's so much I can learn from this. and because of the universality of humanity and the shared brokenness and depravity that we have, there but for the grace of God go I, right? And even beyond the grace of God, I just think about my life, the thoughts I've had, the temptations that I've had, the things that I've thought about, and then, none of us is immune from this, and that's what we need to realize.
No,
if we become Pharisees, if we just gloat. So I think it's important for us as we start to have this discussion today to focus on ourselves, focus on the church, and not point fingers, but begin to think about, how we can push back on this with those who have been victimized, those who are perpetrators, and even ourselves. How do we prevent these types of things from happening in our own lives and in the lives of the kids, the people that we know and love? So here's what we're going to do. Did you want to say something?
Well, I before we go further, so we don't come back to this, but that Matt Lauer allegation, when that came forward, that was shocking. And I don't know what made that one a little bit different from the rest. All of them, the words that you have expressed have been in many ways how I've gone about dealing with this. I've even thought about, man, has there been ever a time, the allegations I see coming forward, mostly it feels like it deals a lot with power and others, but have I ever said anything that was or could be construed as harassment? Or have there ever been a time where I've made a mistake, or I've made a crude joke, or I've done something, and it just made me think of all the times that maybe I might have done something. Yeah. How could I have contributed to this? But that Matt Lauer allegation, for some reason, it just hit closer to home, and maybe it was because I just have woken up every morning for so long. Theory. Yeah, and you welcome him into your home.
Yeah, he's part of your life.
Yeah, and so that one, more than any of the others, and I don't like to say this, I don't like to admit the fact that like the other ones, there starts to become so many of them, you can become desensitized. But Matt Lauer, that one, I was taken back. It took me a moment to really think, oh my gosh, like I felt like it was getting hit close to home, and it just caused me to really think about it. And it's because we invite this individual into our home every morning.
And he has a well-crafted and curated public persona and personality that is designed, I think, and lived out to be endearing to people, to draw people in, to, in the end, generate ratings and revenue, right? But you want to say you believe that what you saw was the genuine person. And again, this goes back to the brokenness in us all. If we don't have a good theology of sin, everything else falls apart in terms of our view of the world and our view of ourselves. So, and for years, Jason, when you were going through that list, we had a discussion here in our office the other day about this after the Matt Lauer thing, that for years, these things, there was an assumption that if anybody heard about this, it was covered up. And that assumption was, or we should cover it up. We don't mention it to anybody else. So among political figures, when you go back in history and you look at, let's just say, the Kennedys, with all of the allegations around them that I think are very, very reasonable in terms of the philandering, and even with JFK, and I've read a lot on him, of what went on in the White House multiple times a day, and the stories that are now coming out, but that was all covered up. People knew that. The Secret Service knew about this. People close to him knew that. But it was just assumed that's to be covered up. And what's even more horrifying is when you listen to the stories of the wives of these people, and I remember hearing this several times when you go back into the 60s and look at some of the most public of government figures and people who were involved in civil affairs back then, there was always this unspoken philandering. Well, now that it's coming out, why didn't, people say, why didn't their wives speak up against it? There was this assumption that that's what men do. And to be a good wife, I let my man do that. So I think it's a good thing that sin is being exposed. It needs to be exposed, otherwise it's not going to be dealt with. And it's good for both the sinner and it's good for both the victims of the sin, because the sinner needs to be driven to redemption, and the one who has been victimized needs to find, hope and healing, we would say. And so we need to have that conversation. So, look, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, and I want to tell people, because we're going to have a conversation, and we want you to know that the conversation we're going to have here is going to unfold. It is in process. We're going to be thinking out loud with each other. We're not even sure what the other person's going to say, but we're going to share some of the thoughts we've had initially on this, just as talking points to get people thinking. This is not the final word, and it will not at all be exhaustive. And we recognize the fact that today it's two guys in the studio talking back and forth. And we will, we realize that there are other voices that need to be heard in this. We're actually going to invite some of those voices in. One of them, Jason, who are we going to have in a few weeks on the podcast?
In the next few weeks we'll have Jenny Mueller, who she developed a program that specifically speaks about dating violence, sexual assault. And so we'll be having her. It's called Create Your Statement. So we'll invite her in to participate in this conversation. And I'm sure we'll invite others as the days and months go on, because I think this is a needed conversation.
Right. So understand that we recognize the limitations we have here, but at the same time we need to talk about it, and we're going to. So stay with us, and we'll get at this when we come back from the break. If you've ever been in need of a soundbite, video, or image, you need to visit videoblocks.com/CPYU and learn how to receive a special membership offer created just for our podcast listeners. Go to videoblocks.com/CPYU to get all the stock footage, audio, and images you can imagine for just $149 for an entire year. At VideoBlocks, you can download all the stock media your heart desires from their member library. You have access to 150,000 videos, 100,000 audio clips, and 400,000 images. All content is royalty-free, so you can use it for commercial and personal projects. New content is being added to VideoBlocks regularly, so there is always something fresh to download. Youth workers and churches have found VideoBlocks to be a valuable resource for all their video, audio, and image needs. To learn more and to take advantage of this triple bundle for the low price of $149, visit videoblocks.com/CPYU. That's videoblocks.com/CPYU.
Welcome back to Youth Culture Matters. We're having a conversation today about the recent allegations against against many Hollywood stars, against many of those that are celebrities. And we ended our last opening segment talking about Matt Lauer and how it hit close to home. And so, Walt, I want to maybe dive into a conversation now about just some of the many reasons why this is happening. You and I speak often about the hypersexualized world that we live in, its impact, its influence, and we're now seeing some of this start to come forward in front of us or to explode. And personally, it's long overdue. It feels like that many of these things have just been hiding and been waiting to be seen. So what would you say about reasons for some of this? Why is this happening now? What are some of the reasons that we've even gotten to this place?
Yeah, look, I'm not an expert on this, but just as a culture watcher and as someone who does so from a Christian perspective, I would say, in response to your question, two things come to mind.
Yeah.
And we always have to start with, I think, theology and narrative and the biblical narrative. And we know that the world is a broken place and human beings are horribly broken. Our default setting is to do the wrong thing. And we live in a culture that actually celebrates doing whatever we feel like doing. And when our default setting is to do the wrong thing, when we understand human depravity and this default setting to sin, to rebel against God, to go against God's borders and boundaries and establish our own borders and boundaries based on how we feel and what we feel like doing at any given point in time, it makes sense then, obviously, that we'll do the wrong thing. And I think we would all agree that what we're reading about, these allegations, they are the wrong thing. And we at least have enough sense as a culture to say this is wrong. The fact that we hide these things is an indicator, try to sweep them under the rug or keep them covered. This is an indicator that we know that they're not right. So I think that's the first thing.
Good. Yeah.
The second thing would be just cultural influences, because there's so much in the culture that, as I've said before, pushes us to indulge that default setting, to indulge our sinful nature. So one of those that I think is really rather new and unique in our modern history here in North America is what guys like Robert Bellah and Charles Taylor in his book Secular Age have called expressive individualism. That you rule yourself. There is no one that can be over you who can tell you whether it's a god or another human being or a system or an institution. There is no one, there is nothing that should set your borders and boundaries. You need to rely on your feelings and express yourself. So one of the highest values in today's world is to be authentic. And the way I think this works itself out is you just take any one of these names or just look in the mirror and you realize that there are strong urges and desires that we're told to indulge without borders and boundaries. And so that gives us justification to satisfy ourselves and use and abuse other people. But then you add to that this hypersexualized world that you and I talk about constantly to parents and students in our sexual integrity initiative, and you've got a lifetime. Jason, you have this, I have this. Everybody who's listening to this podcast, whether they're old or young, has this memory bank of years. If I'm 61 years old, I have 61 years of it, of living in a culture, in a world that's throwing messages and images at me constantly, 24/7, around the clock, that say when it comes to your sexuality, you can do whatever you want, wherever you want, however you want, whenever you want, with whomever you want. And when you hear that over and over and over, you become what you hear. If you don't have your guard up, if you aren't preaching the gospel to yourself, you become what you hear. So a simple answer to your question, and I've said it before, is it's not surprising. We're seeing the fruit of this. Without borders and boundaries, without God's good design, it just all goes awry. And so you have this.
You're bringing up something with regards to narcissism, something you talk about often. And it's been interesting as I watch how narcissism and power are closely linked oftentimes. And that's what this is. It feels like there's ego, there's narcissistic tendencies, there's power that's involved in each of these stories. And when we think of the garden, when we think of the default that you had mentioned, there is something in the midst of this that just calls out our brokenness. One of the things that I'm often talking about is, and we know this, but our brokenness is seen in our brokenness with ourselves, with God, with the world, and with each other. And I think that this plays out when we are definitely very broken from who we are in His image. Our narcissistic tendencies begin to come forward. This expressive individualism, I think, begins to play itself out. And power, because really it seems like many of these stories are much more about power than they are about anything. They were able to do it, so they did it. And that's never a good circumstance. That's never a great place. And it also feels like in order for others to keep power, they kept quiet. And that is really unfortunate. I also say this, you had two, I'll have two. And here's my second, and I know that you're going to agree with me on this, but I think that we sit where we now stand, or we sit where we now see everything, is because of pornography.
Yeah.
Pornography has had a tremendous influence on this, whether we want to admit it or not. Porn use is skyrocketing. It's epidemic both in the church and outside of the church. We have a growing number of men and women that are looking at it. And if we're really honest, that is having a tremendous impact then on all of this. I think on how the way we see sex. If you look at many of these stories, I would guarantee as they start to come out, pornography has played a role in many, if not all of them. And how do I know that? I would just say, as I've had conversations with those that have been convicted of violent crimes, as I've read about those that have been convicted of violent crimes, pornography has had some sort of influence in their life. And I mean, it just reinforces the work that we're doing. Sometimes I just really wonder, is what we do, because so often I believe the work that you and I are a part of is proactive. We're trying to prevent having to be reactive like we are on this podcast right now. But sometimes I just think it just gets lost. When you're being proactive, sometimes that voice isn't as loud as the one that's reactive. Mm-hmm. But I think that we really need to be proactive in this, and we need to be shouting the influence of pornography, because I really believe that is a source of a lot of what's happening in many of these stories.
Yeah, when I talk to parents, I talk to youth workers, and even when I talk to students about pornography, I will list for them. I have slides where I go through pretty rapid fire a list of these are the effects of pornography on human beings. Some of them are biochemical, some of them are psychological, some of them are spiritual. That's all interwoven together, obviously. But one of the things that it just came to mind as you were talking there in terms of some of the slides that I put up and some of the effects is that just how we're nurtured into how to, let's just say, talk as men here. And women need to understand this about us as men, but pornography nurtures us into an understanding of how to treat a woman, how to view a woman, what a woman's purpose is, what we see the identity of a female as being. And what pornography has done for a couple of generations of kids, and certainly for this emerging generation now, is it's telling the lie that a woman is nothing more or less than an object for you to satisfy yourself with and to find sexual release. And that becomes the ultimate, right? Sexual release. And we're thinking here as well. I mean, it's become an idol. It's become an idol.
But I'll push it back just a little bit, because I think the same is happening for women.
Oh, yeah.
And how they see men in the pornography that now is prevalent.
Right.
So I think that's also really important for us to know.
And I mean, I love Tim Keller's definition of an idol. It's the taking of a good thing, a good created thing, and making it an ultimate thing. And what can't get lost in this discussion, and I'm afraid what happens too often in the church, is that we throw the baby out with the bathwater and we start to demonize sex and sexuality, which that is not what we should do. That is not the issue. It is the broken, fallen expressions of God's good gift of sex and sexuality that we need to be pushing back on. And yeah, this has become the ultimate thing for us. And in our culture, and that's why we talk about a hypersexualized culture that encourages this, preaches this, and talks about this. Let me give you an example of mixed messages. Yeah. So yesterday, I can't remember, I was on my computer and I was scanning the news, and I can't remember, actually it was on my phone. I can't remember if it was on the Google News feed or if it was in USA Today. But in both of those, I will scroll down on my screen through stories. And the stories will have photos and then a headline, and then you can click on to see the text. And interspersed, everyone's familiar with this, interspersed with the stories are ads. And it struck me, now I couldn't get a screen capture. Chris is trying to teach me how to, we can't figure the doggone thing out on my phone. But I wish I got it. I know what you're going to say now. You should have an iPhone, right? And I wish I had captured it, because I stop at the story about Bette Midler. So that one's come out, that Bette Midler, Me Too. Hashtag Me Too. So I'm like, man, okay, another one. So I'm reading that. Then I scroll to the next thing, which is not a story but an ad with this photo from, it's an ad for the Victoria's Secret fashion show, which must be coming up on television here. I'm out of the loop on that one. I think I'm proud to say. They made me aware of it yesterday, but here I am, a man, and I'm looking at these women in undergarments walking down the runway towards me, and it's this ad that's meant to capture my attention. And I'll just say, as a man, it sends a loud message to me that taps into a God-given gift of my sexuality, sexual desires, sexual urges, but also sends a loud message about what a female is. Because the reality is, neither of the, I think it was 2 or 3 on the walkway there walking towards the camera, walking towards me, none of them weren't named. There were no personalities there. They were objects. Mm-hmm. And people could say to me now, respond and say, well, shame on you. That's right. No, this is the way it works. This is what happens, and I have to preach the gospel to myself and deliberately push back on that. And I think people need to. Does this make sense? I mean, it
makes total sense.
Yeah, I hope people understand. But there's the mixed messages, and so
most definitely
you've got this balancing.
And I think again, it works both ways for men and women because a woman could see that and be empowered and say, well, no, I am in control of my body. I get to decide. And this is the issue with pornography in our culture, is that it's just destroyed any sort of middle ground, and I think that it's caused us to live into whatever we want to do, whatever feels good, we can do. Yeah. And really, it's reshaped our sexuality. Yeah. And I think that you speak about this often, I speak about this often, but these are great opportunities to speak about good biblical sex education. Yeah. To look at sex is not a bad thing. Sex is a great thing. Sex is a beautiful thing. God made it.
Yeah, youth workers.
And allowing.
Yeah. Youth work. I'm getting excited here because youth workers and parents. I mean, I want to say what you're saying is so true. We try to push this. Youth workers and parents, you need to be talking about a theology of sex and sexuality, because there is a biblical narrative on this, and your kids and you and me and the parents that you work with, everyone in your church. We are being catechized 24/7 by a cultural narrative on all sorts of things, including sexuality. As you were talking, one of the things that I remembered is talking to students about this and telling them, like I'll talk to middle school students or high school students, pornography will convince you, and research has shown this, that as a teenager you will grow up with the belief, or as a boy, you will grow up with a belief that if you just touch a woman, if you just touch her, she will scream out in sexual ecstasy. Where do they get that from? That's pornography. Those are the lies of what they see in pornography. And it's always, I hate to make light of it, but it's funny when you say that married women, when I talk to parents about this, the married women in the room will chuckle. And the reason they chuckle is they know how false that actually is. And then men will chuckle as well because they know how false that actually is.
Most definitely.
But we see the lies, we buy the lies, we believe the lies, and then we start to live the lies as if they are truth, and this is what happens. So we need to.
Well, let's take a break. I think that would be really good for us to talk a little bit about prevention. We're talking about youth groups, we're talking about parents, we're talking about homes. So let's maybe move the conversation just to prevention, because this needs to be a conversation. But what might that look like? So let's take a break.
Yeah, and when we come back, can we talk a little bit as well about how youth workers and parents can talk about these things with kids? Because I think we've got a great teachable moment right now.
I like that. Well, we'll be right back with you here in a moment.
I'm very excited to tell you about a new resource we've just launched here at CPYU. Just Add Parents is a series of ready-to-use parent meetings that feature 3 10-minute video teaching segments, each followed by a time for guided small group discussion. Youth workers, Just Add Parents is perfect for use in your parent meeting or a parent class. The teaching content is not only designed to inform parents regarding pressing cultural issues, but to equip them to respond to these unfolding realities in a gospel-centered, practical manner, all with the goal of helping you help parents lead their children into believing and behaving Christianly in today's rapidly changing culture. Each Just Add Parents meeting includes video teaching segments, PDFs of discussion questions, and other handouts. You can order Just Add Parents as either a download or on a thumb drive. I'm happy to announce that the first installment in the Just Add Parents Parent Meeting series is now available, and it's titled Tech Sensible Parenting. If you want to help your parents understand and respond proactively to kids and technology with a Just Add Parents Parent Meeting, you can learn more on our website at cpyu.org.
Welcome back to Youth Culture Matters. We're continuing our conversation on the recent allegations, the Weinstein Effect that we had opened up with, and we're going to continue now with just talking about the conversations we need to have. And I know, Walt, you had started on your blog some of these conversations. I think you've done 2 blog posts on this, maybe 3, but I would love to hear from you some of what you had in those blog posts. What were some of those conversations that we need to have or be aware of?
Yeah, and I blogged on this earlier this week. I did a blog titled Matt Lauer, Teachable Moments and Theologizing About Sexuality and Sin. And this really is my default now, is to try to process these things in real time and really focus on what can I learn about myself, or what can I learn about humanity, or what can I learn about the kinds of responses God would want us to have from my study of Scripture. So I'll just share what I came up with the other day when I posted this blog. And again, this is, as we've said earlier, this is in process. It's not exhaustive. You may find some loopholes in here, some things you say are incomplete, fully understood. That's justified, but we're in process trying to work through this. So here's what I wrote. I actually wrote 4 things. First thing was, if your initial reaction to this whole thing with Matt Lauer is smug, self-assured, and a disapproving finger wag in his direction and others like him, that's actually quite telling. Because what that does is that reveals where your heart is, where my heart is. And if we default to a finger wag, we're not really thinking about ourselves. And we're becoming the Pharisees. And I don't think that reaction is really helpful. I don't think it brings honor and glory to God, to the one who saved us, because we have absolutely no hope of saving ourselves. We are all broken. And so if as a youth worker or if as a parent, this is my default reaction to things like this, you're teaching your kids to live the same way. And you're forcing them to point the finger at others and throw stones at others without any sort of self-examination, which really needs to be where we start. And by the way, self-examination does not excuse the sin of others. It does not downplay the sin of others. It isn't pushing it aside. It's not addressing it. I think it's addressing it in the proper way. So that would be my first thing. The second would be, if you are prone to politicize, as I said earlier, stories like this, you're making a horrible, horrible mistake. This isn't a political issue. It's a human nature issue. And it's not an issue for just conservatives or just liberals. It's a universal issue. It's on both sides. And when we use these things as weapons to flail at each other ideologically, we're making a huge mistake. That doesn't get us anywhere. Sexual brokenness, temptation, sin, and thought, word, and deed, they're no respecter of persons. They're no respecter of faith commitments. They're no respecter of political views. So shame on us if we use it this way. And shame on me if I cave into this temptation. Shame on me if I'm teaching my kids or the kids I know and love to do this. The third thing I said is that, and I mentioned this earlier as well, but I think we need to push on this constantly, is that rock-solid truth, there but for the grace of God go I. Look, there's 2 enemies I have to deal with. First one is me, and the second one is the enemy who got us in trouble in the first place back in Genesis 3:6, who we read in the Scriptures prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And consequently, we all need to stay alert. So use this. It's like a warning flag that goes up, like danger ahead. And then lastly, I would say this. This story really does offer us opportunities to talk in positive ways about good theology and good responses with our kids. We can't just sweep it aside. So what we need to do is speak to their heart and push them towards a sober-minded life that makes them constantly aware, first and foremost, of the enemy outside of us and the enemy within, our own depravity, so that we're ready for this. It was interesting, today I blogged on this, Jason. I used Scotty Smith's book, Everyday Prayers. We've had him on the podcast before. Yeah. And the prayer for that morning included this line: protect us from the evil one and rescue us from ourselves. So again, just trying to frame good, positive conversations on this.
Yeah, and there's many conversations I think that can be had in the midst of this, and you
had some practical ideas.
Well, I did, and I just think of what you're speaking though too. As we look inward, I think of my own story. I do what I do because of what God has done in my life. And there was a time in my life I was living completely separate from God. I was running from God in many ways. And when I came back to faith, when I began to really live into the relationship with Jesus that was available, I knew that I needed to make some changes. And one of those things I first needed to do was to admit my own sin, to admit where I'd gone wrong, to forgive myself. But then I did this work of asking for forgiveness from others. I was owning my past, and I think that in the midst of this sober-minded life, I think as we come to a place of both reflection and ownership, it causes us to have a posture that just causes us to fall to our knees and say, God, I'm so sorry. I need you. And that was true in my own life. And I just think about, I always watch for the follow-up. What is the response from some of these individuals that have been accused of these actions? What are the words that they use? And it's really hard to know, because words are words, but actions speak louder than words. And so we really won't know the impact of all of these allegations on these individuals' lives for years to come. We're just not going to see it because it's going to take a lot of time to see how this has had an impact on them. And I just know that when something like this happens, it is opportunity to speak it. I know that in our life, here's just some practical things that we try to do in our home. And the first is we try not to bring Scripture out when there's been an incident or something has happened. Scripture is alive and well in our home prior to any big event, if you will. We don't want to use Scripture to correct behavior. We want Scripture to be something that brings life and allows for us to know how to live life. And so it's constant. It's not something that we pull out and, hey, you made a mistake. Do you know that in this chapter and verse it said this? And so I think that that's really important, that it's not just used for corrective behavior, but just it's used in a way that gives us significance and understanding and a posture, much like you're talking about.
Can I ask you, before
please.
you go on to the next thing, let me just clarify there. I want to be sure I hear you right. You're not saying avoid using Scripture in moments where you need to correct. Correct. You're saying just don't take the posture that we're only going to use Scripture in moments where you have to correct. Okay, right. I wanted to clarify that.
You're using it in all moments.
Yeah.
That's a great clarification.
Yeah.
And I here's something else too, though. This kind of goes along then with what we're seeing happening and what we're talking about. But we have a separation between secrets and surprises. We often want to say, sometimes grandparents will come over and they'll say, okay, don't tell mom and dad that we gave you this candy. And so it's a secret. And in our house, we try to be really careful with secrets. Surprises are okay. You can have a surprise. You can, throw a party, or you can hide something from dad or from mom for a period of time to surprise them. But we don't have secrets. Secrets are those things that lie in the dark, that we don't tell anyone, that we don't want someone else to find out about. And the reason is we want for our kids to know that there is nothing that we hide. We want for things to be known. We want for the things that are happening in our lives to be seen. And so I think that we have this tendency to have this idea of secrets, and so secrets eventually then teach us how to hide things, to keep things in the dark. Surprises at some point are going to come to the light. And that's what I think is really practical when we're talking about this in our youth ministry, when we're talking about this in our homes, that we can separate these two things. And sometimes secrets have been so entrenched in our lives that we have to really work to not have secrets. We have to learn how to allow light to be seen in the darkness of some of these places. And then I think that leads to this last thing, and it's this. The thing that often lies in secret is pornography, or things associated with sexuality and sex. And if we can learn how to speak honestly and openly about some of these things, turning towards Scripture, having opportunities for good biblical sex education, what we're doing is shining light on places that are often dark. And if we do that, that's where tremendous change happens. It happened in my life. It happens in so many lives that I have the opportunity to work with day in and day out. And I think that if we can find ways to be really honest about the things that sit in the dark, then secrets begin to pass, and we actually begin to see life start to manifest itself.
That's good. Okay, so surprises, secrets, let's transition from there. That's a good segue, because in the last few minutes we have, I want to talk a bit about the victims.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes they've been forgotten for a long time. I think they may get forgotten in the publicity about all these high-profile people who are coming forward or being exposed right now. The curtain is being pulled back on. With the victims, let's talk about how to handle that, because now I'm going to say something here that I really want people to hear what I'm saying correctly, because I think youth workers and parents, we haven't listened to the victims well enough. Victims have been unwilling to come forward because of threats and by perpetrators, or I'm not going to be believed, that sort of thing. So I think we have to be really careful about that on the one hand, and we need to talk about what we do with someone when they come forward. We'll get to that here. I want to talk about that. But there's another reality in our social media world, especially of teenagers who desperately want to fit in, that we're seeing with a lot of the negative things that happen. A lot of people are saying that they're participating or have been a part of these things when in fact they have not been. Now, please understand what I'm saying here, because we need to be aware that there are kids who may think that this is a way to get some attention, to get people to pay attention to me, when in fact they haven't been victimized, but they may say, "Me too." I think that you're going to see those things, but that does not in any way diminish our responsibility to sort this out, to take every single mention of this seriously, and to connect the dots, to go beyond just pondering whether or not this is true, but to get someone who has some expertise in this involved in making the decision about whether or not this is true, and in helping those who have been victimized. And there are a lot of them, helping them find the hope and the healing, the help that they need. I would just say professionally, to find a good Christian counselor. I think about Diane Langberg, who we've had on the podcast, who talks about sexual abuse, who talks about trauma, and people need to track with her. Her wonderful book, Suffering in the Heart of God, is very helpful. Her website is helpful. To follow her on Facebook and Twitter is especially helpful because she's speaking to these things right now. But I purely raise that Me Too thing, that there will be people who that is entirely accurate, warranted, in need of response. But I'm just guessing that we're going to see some kids who come forward and say Me Too because that's a way to get some attention. That points to deeper needs, but let someone else decide whether or not those accusations are true. And once it's discerned whether those are true or not, there's either way, there are issues there that need to be dealt with. Does that make sense? Did I state that well? Because I don't want to
so.
state that in the wrong way. I don't want that to be misinterpreted.
When things like this happen, there are then individuals that unfortunately will use it for attention, much like you're saying. I will say, though, that one of the dynamics of this that we have to do a great job of is responding quickly.
Yes.
I think that so often what we do is we let this sit, and we hope that it will play itself out, and that's just not what we should be doing. We need to be engaging in these conversations. I also, this has been true in our ministry, but I try to be really careful with even using the word victim, because it can be trigger for some of the people that we're essentially trying to speak to. I want for them to understand, those that have had this be a part of their story, that this is a choice that is stolen from an individual, that it's essentially someone using power over someone else, and that it's not their fault. I think oftentimes the conversations I can have with individuals that have experienced this, they feel like they are at fault, and they feel like it was a choice. And I really believe we need to be able to communicate very clearly that this was not a choice. This was a choice that was stolen from an individual, and it was not their fault. Those are really important words and very important things to allow for the other to know. And then I think we've got to be able to encourage these conversations to come forward. We've got to, and people are going to watch. To be honest, this is why we've got to address these things quickly, and we've got to address them well, because others are going to be watching. It's not unlikely that there are going to be individuals in your youth group or individuals that your son or daughter know that, or maybe are, a part of the story, and they're going to be watching our actions. They're going to be watching what we say. They're going to be watching how we engage, and that's really important for us to be aware of, because as we engage each of these stories, others are going to be watching, and the beautiful opportunity that we have in that is we actually have an opportunity to reshape stories, to point towards the good model that we see in Scripture. But we have to respond diligently. We have to respond well. We have to respond with discernment and with wisdom.
That's good. Let me give you, as you're talking here, I'm scribbling some thoughts, some action steps that I think are helpful. If I'm a youth worker, I'm a parent, these are some very helpful action steps. So let me state these quickly, what I just jotted down, what came to mind here, and then add or subtract from it as you see fit as we close this out. First thing is, I think we have to focus on prevention, and we've mentioned this already. Youth workers and parents, one way to focus on prevention, because the specific issue that we're talking about here is related to human depravity and sexuality, is to teach our kids about human depravity, to teach our kids about our default setting, to get them to see that they are broken, and also to get them to understand God's good and wonderful design for sexuality. So that's youth workers and parents together. And I would say for parents primarily, and then for youth workers, a second step is to really be about the process of catechesis. That may be a word that's unfamiliar to many people, but it's coming back into our youth ministry world, into our parenting world. It's very important. Catechesis is the regular instruction through repetition and questions and answers of teaching young people and children the truths of God's Word. So in some theological traditions, mine's one, we actually have written catechisms. And the folks, Tim Keller and the folks at Redeemer Presbyterian Church have recently released, I've seen it, I love it, the New City Catechism, and we'll include some links to that. And that is a great tool to use to teach these truths, to give us perspective. Because if we don't know the truth, we can't discern the errors. And so that's one of the best preventive steps that we can take. So then, what do we do beyond that? That's the prevention. As the allegations come up, if you have a student in your youth group who posts something on social media with a hashtag #MeToo, or there's rumblings among kids and you're hearing rumors, don't squelch them. Don't push them down. Don't assume, well, that just can't be true. And I wouldn't even do this, say, well, that's so-and-so. And they're always stretching the truth, or they're always looking for attention. As I said before, those things will happen, but don't diminish the reality of those things you have to take every report seriously and assume from the start that it's the truth and we're going to deal with it. But then I wouldn't step into the position as a parent or certainly not as a youth worker of being judge and jury of whether or not something's true. I think you need to connect the dots and get them to someone who is trained, who knows how to deal with these things, who has experience in dealing with these things, and knows how to get at the root to see whether or not the allegation someone's bringing forward is true or not. And you want to walk with them through that, but you don't want to be the one that's judge and jury on discerning the truth. Immediately connect them with help. What that means is, youth workers, you have to know today who you're going to send people to if this issue comes up tomorrow. Don't wait until tomorrow when you get a phone call, a text, a knock on the door from a parent who's in crisis, like scrambling now to try to figure out who to get. Know who those people are right away. And then lastly, don't think that you can handle this and be a counselor to handle this. You don't want to be the person who does that. You're a dot connector. Don't overestimate your abilities to handle these things, because the reality is very few of us are. So find a trained, competent Christian counselor, and we know that there are ways to do that. Diane Langberg offers advice on that in her book, Suffering in the Heart of God, which is on trauma. So again, incomplete, but some first steps I think that you need to take. Got any other advice there, Jason? I mean, I think those are good.
Yeah, they're exhaustive. I think that those are really good. I think overall, I think it's a painting a picture of posture. Like, we don't have all the answers, and but we serve one that does, and so it's just really important for us to not believe we know everything, and to really just kind of rely on the community that God has given us to be able to engage in this. And I really appreciate what you've said.
Yeah,
and that's good.
Well, we'll as we finish this up, we're going to include links to everything we talked about, any helpful resources maybe that we have not thought about to this point. Keep an eye on this podcast page on cpyu.org, because we may add things to the list beneath this podcast as we discover them, because this, as we've said, is an issue that's a hot topic right now, and it really is unfolding and will continue to unfold. And let's remember, God is sovereign. God is in control of all this. And we are particular people placed in this particular time, this particular place, with these particular kids entrusted us and these particular news stories and issues. And God calls us to not only process them, but trust that He is doing something. I'm not sure what it is, but God is doing something. And certainly when we're being forced to deal with our individual and corporate, institutional, systemic sin, that's a good thing. So we'll see where this goes, and pray that God will bring great things about. Any final words, Jason?
No, I think you've done a great job. I think that's exactly it.
Well, thanks. And thanks to everyone for joining us on this, and we look forward to talking with you again on the next episode of Youth Culture Matters.
Thanks for joining us for Youth Culture Matters, a podcast from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. If you'd like to learn more about today's youth culture, visit our website at cpyu.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, email us at podcast@cpyu.org.